In the 2 decades following the opening of the first Pacific Line, dozens of other railroad companies stepped up to the plate to fully exploit the West. Everyone wanted to own a railroad that ended with the name Pacific. At stake were vast fortunes to be made from freight and passenger traffic. 4 major transcontinental railroads, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, the Southern Pacific, the Northern Pacific, and the Great Northern Railway, would all chart new paths westward. Thousands of miles of shorter lines would be built to exploit the West's potential. The vast tracts of fertile soil, millions of acres of virgin forests, mineral deposits such as gold, silver, and copper. To encourage building, the government gave railroad companies land grants totaling over 155 million acres with the right to sell it at a profit. In the mid and late 19th century, railroad executives engaged in an all-out battle with their competitors to expand their territory. Fighting on the front line of the battles were the survey teams, each one out there for their own railroad, trying to stake out their own route, the best route, sometimes racing to stake a claim on the same mountain pass.
In Colorado, in New Mexico, throughout the Rockies, these survey teams would often tangle with each other. There was gunfire, there was intrigue in the night, men staking out routes by torchlight and bonfires, trying to get there before the other guy. And in that still relatively lawless area, just about anything went. The person who got there first with the most was the one who got the best route and probably won the game.
But winning the game depended on more than staking out the best route. The railroads needed settlers more than anything else.
The settlers were their customers. They were the passengers. They were the ones who shipped the wheat, who imported the machinery, who needed the fertilizer. If it wasn't for the settlers, not thousands but millions of them, the railroads would have had no reason for being.
The government paved the way for settlers with the Federal Homestead Act of 1862. American citizens and permanent immigrants could purchase 160 acres of public land for only $10 after 5 years of residence. In order to sell as much land as possible, railroad companies began competing for the immigrants. Railroad-sponsored posters, pamphlets, and books promised religious and political freedom, cheap, fertile land, and low-priced railroad tickets. The truth was often stretched or completely ignored. California, the cornucopia of the world, room for millions of immigrants and a climate for health and wealth. At the same time, the railroad sent hundreds of railroad pitchmen throughout the East Coast, Europe, and parts of Asia to recruit as many land-hungry settlers as possible. In the late 19th century, millions of men, women, and children from mainly Germany, Ireland, Italy, Scotland, Scandinavia, and Russia journeyed west by rail, bringing with them the dream of freedom and opportunity and the hope for a better life. Of the 16.5 million immigrants who came to America during the second half of the 19th century, almost 11 million immigrants boarded trains to find their new homes. Joining the human wave were the legions of American citizens who wanted to relocate to the West. The population in the West skyrocketed. Railroad technology brought some of the fastest, most profound changes in human history. The Western railroads did not link towns, they created them. People settled around where the railroad stations were built. And much of this pattern is still visible today. The town of Denver, Colorado grew because the railroads chose it as a junction point at the base of the Rockies. But hundreds of other western towns declined or died if the railroad bosses built their lines elsewhere. The settlement the West brought on by the railroad radically transformed the land. Prairies were dug up to create farms for corn and wheat. Virgin forests were cut for new housing construction and lumber to build and run the railroad. All of this growth generated the real moneymaker for the Western railroads, freight